Sir, this watch is a steal. You must buy it now. No thanks, mate. Not my style. What? You must buy it. It's a deal. Easy there, mate. Calm down.
The luxury watch boutique sat in the heart of the city's most expensive shopping district. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls reflected soft golden lights, and inside, velvet-lined cases displayed some of the rarest timepieces in the world. This was the kind of place where confidence was usually loud. Designer suits, bodyguards, and people who wanted to be seen. That afternoon, Ozzy walked in quietly. No entourage, no security. Just a worn black jacket, old boots, and a calm, unbothered presence. One of the salesmen glanced at him, then looked away. Not out of politeness, but dismissal. As if Ozzy didn't quite fit the image of someone who belonged there. Ozzy moved slowly toward the main display, and stopped in front of a watch that stood out from all the others. $1.03. 2 million limited edition Rolex. It caught the light differently, almost like time itself was frozen inside the case. After a moment, Ozzy spoke. "Can I see this one?" The salesman turned back with a thin smile, the kind that carried more judgment than welcome. "Sir," he said, lowering his voice slightly, "that piece is extremely exclusive." The message was clear. Exclusive watch, exclusive clients. Ozzy didn't argue. He simply waited. The salesman deliberately took his time unlocking the case, as if hoping Ozzy would lose interest and walk away. Other customers began to watch. A few exchanged glances, sensing the quiet tension building in the room. When the watch was finally placed on the counter, the salesman added, "Please be very careful." Ozzy lifted it slowly, respectfully. There was no excitement in his expression, no desire to impress anyone. Just calm curiosity, like someone appreciating craftsmanship rather than price. And in that moment, the atmosphere inside the store shifted, because the man being silently judged didn't raise his voice, didn't mention his name, didn't ask for special treatment. And the salesman had no idea that within minutes, this watch and this store would become part of a lesson no one inside would ever forget. Have you ever been silently judged just by how you looked? What did you do? The salesman didn't step back after placing the watch on the counter. He stayed close, too close, his eyes fixed on Ozzy's hands, tracking every movement like he was guarding something already stolen. His body language said everything he wasn't willing to say out loud. Ozzy noticed it immediately. He didn't react. Instead, he slowly turned the Rolex in his hands, studying the weight, the balance, the craftsmanship. To him, it wasn't just a price tag. It was a piece of engineering, built by people who obsessed over details. The salesman cleared his throat. "Just so you know," he said, casually but loud enough for others to hear, "this model isn't something we usually show without an appointment." A couple standing nearby glanced over. The woman raised an eyebrow. The man shifted uncomfortably. Ozzy looked up. "I asked politely," he replied. His voice was calm, controlled. The salesman gave a short laugh. "Of course. I'm just saying most of our clients plan ahead for something like this." That word again, clients, the implication hung in the air. Ozzy placed the watch gently back onto the counter and folded his hands. He waited, giving the salesman space to either correct himself or continue. He chose the second option. "If you're interested," the salesman added, "we have other pieces that are more practical." He gestured vaguely toward the far end of the store, the cheaper section. Not cheap by normal standards, but far from the crown jewel Ozzy was holding moments ago. A young man near the window pulled out his phone. He didn't start recording yet, but he held it low, instinctively sensing that something was unfolding. Ozzy glanced around. He could feel the eyes on him now, not curiosity, judgment. Some customers seemed to side with the salesman. Others looked embarrassed by the exchange. Ozzy didn't try to impress anyone. He simply said, "I like this one." The salesman sighed, visibly irritated. "Sir," he said, dropping the friendly tone entirely, "I don't think you understand the commitment involved here." He tapped the glass counter once. "Sharp, this isn't something you try on for fun." The words stung, and not because they were loud, but because they were designed to shrink. Ozzy's expression didn't change. I understand exactly what I'm looking at, he replied. The salesman's jaw tightened. Do you? He asked. Because this watch costs more than most people's houses. The sentence landed like a challenge. Around them, the store felt smaller, quieter. Even the background music seemed to fade under the weight of the moment. Ozzy nodded slowly. Yes, I know. That should have ended it. Instead, the salesman leaned in slightly and lowered his voice, not to be discreet, but to be cutting. I just don't want any misunderstandings. Ozzy met his eyes for the first time. What kind of misunderstandings? The salesman hesitated. Just for a second. Then he forced a smile. Payment, he said. There it was, the judgment that had been there from the beginning, finally spoken. A woman near the counter let out a quiet breath. Someone else muttered under their breath, shaking their head. Ozzy didn't raise his voice, didn't bristle, didn't defend himself. Instead, he said something that caught everyone off guard. Why don't you let me worry about that? The salesman straightened, clearly offended. Because, he said firmly, I've seen situations like this before. That sentence hung heavy, full of assumptions. Ozzy placed both hands flat on the counter. I'm standing right here, he said. I'm respectful. I'm asking questions. I haven't caused any problems. He paused. So tell me, what exactly is the issue? For a moment, the salesman had no answer. He looked around, aware of the eyes, the phones, the silence. Then he forced a shrug. No issue, he said. Just store policy. But everyone knew this wasn't about policy. It was about who the salesman thought belonged and who didn't. And as Ozzy stood there, calm, patient, unshaken, the quiet tension in the room continued to build. Because the watch was still on the counter, the judgment had been made, and the situation was moving toward a moment no one could rewind. The watch sat on the glass counter between them, silent, heavy, untouchable. The salesman folded his arms, standing just inches away, as if his presence alone could prevent something terrible from happening. His eyes never left the Rolex, not Ozzy's face, not his posture, just the watch. Ozzy reached forward again. Slowly, carefully, he picked it up, feeling its weight settle into his palm. The craftsmanship was undeniable. Cold metal, flawless edges, a quiet confidence built into every detail. The salesman tensed. Please, he said sharply, be extremely careful. Ozzy didn't respond. He turned the watch slightly, examining the face under the lights. For a moment, everything felt suspended, like the entire store was holding its breath. Then it happened, not dramatically, not recklessly, just a small slip. The watch shifted in Ozzy's hand, barely an inch, but it was enough. The Rolex hit the glass counter edge. A sharp crack cut through the silence. The watch bounced once, then stopped. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the background music seemed to vanish. The salesman's face drained of color. Oh my, he started, then stopped himself. Ozzy looked down. A thin fracture spread across the sapphire crystal, unmistakable. Not shattered, but damaged, expensive damage, the kind that couldn't be ignored. For a long second, Ozzy said nothing. He didn't panic. He didn't swear. He didn't step back. He simply placed the watch gently on the counter. I'm sorry, he said calmly. That was all it took. The salesman exploded. Are you serious? He shouted, his voice echoing through the boutique. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Heads snapped around. Customers froze mid-step. Phones came up instantly now, no hesitation this time. Security guards moved closer. Ozzy remained still. I said I'm sorry, he repeated. It was an accident. The salesman laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. An accident? He snapped. That watch costs $3.2 million. He pointed at Ozzy, anger spilling over. You don't just accidentally break something like that. A guard stepped in. Sir, we're going to need you to stay right here. Ozzy nodded. I wasn't going anywhere. The salesman paced back and forth, hands in his hair. This is exactly why we don't let people like. He stopped himself mid-sentence. Too late? The implication was already clear. Ozzy looked up slowly. People like what? He asked. The salesman avoided his eyes. You know what I mean? He muttered. People who can't afford mistakes like this. The words hit harder than the crack of glass. The store went dead quiet. A woman near the entrance shook her head in disbelief. A man whispered, "That's out of line." Ozzy took a slow breath. "I told you I'd take responsibility," he said evenly. "I meant it." The salesman scoffed. "With what?" he snapped. "You think an apology fixes this?" Ozzy met his gaze. "No," he said, "but respect would have helped before it got here." The salesman threw his hands up. "This is unbelievable," he said loudly. "You come in here, waste my time, and now you destroy a one-of-a-kind piece." He leaned forward, voice rising. "Let's be honest, you can't afford this." The sentence landed like a verdict. Cameras zoomed in. Security stiffened. Customers held their breath. Ozzy didn't flinch. He didn't defend himself. Didn't explain who he was. Didn't raise his voice. Instead, he looked down at the cracked watch, then back up at the salesman, and said something so calm, so controlled, it unsettled everyone in the room. "We'll see." The salesman laughed again, louder this time. "No," he said, "we won't." But as Ozzy stood there, composed, silent, unshaken, one thing became clear to everyone watching. This wasn't the end of the situation. It was the beginning of the moment where judgment was about to meet reality. If you broke something extremely valuable, would you panic, apologize, or stay calm? The store manager arrived quickly. He was a tall man in a tailored suit, calm on the surface but alert, the kind of person trained to sense trouble before it turned into headlines. One glance at the cracked Rolex on the counter was enough to tell him this wasn't a small issue. "What happened?" the manager asked. The salesman spoke immediately, voice tight with frustration. "He mishandled the watch, dropped it. It's damaged." The manager's eyes moved to Ozzy. Ozzy didn't interrupt, didn't argue, didn't explain. He simply nodded. "I was holding it," Ozzy said. "It slipped. I take responsibility." The manager studied him for a moment. Ozzy's clothes, his posture, his calm. There was nothing flashy to latch onto. Nothing that screamed wealth or status. The manager turned back to the salesman. "Did he ask to see it?" "Yes," the salesman replied quickly. "But I warned him." The words were carefully chosen. Ozzy noticed. He said nothing. The manager sighed and looked at the watch again. "This piece can't be sold in this condition," he said. "It's a serious loss." A few customers shifted uncomfortably. Phones were still recording. No one spoke. The manager turned to Ozzy. "Sir, do you understand the value of what was damaged?" "Yes," Ozzy answered. "Very clearly." The manager nodded, as if checking a box. "Then you understand why this is complicated?" Ozzy held his gaze. "I do," he said, "and I'm not running from it." That was the moment the salesman expected Ozzy to say it. His name, his fame, something that would change the power dynamic. But Ozzy didn't. He didn't mention awards, didn't hint at money, didn't try to intimidate anyone. Instead, he stepped back slightly and waited. The salesman misread the pause as weakness. "Look," he said, crossing his arms, "this isn't personal. It's just reality." Ozzy glanced at him. "What reality?" he asked. The salesman shrugged. "Some people can afford accidents like this, some can't." The manager didn't stop him. That silence spoke volumes. A woman near the display whispered, "This is uncomfortable." A man beside her nodded. "He's being judged." Ozzy heard it all. He stayed composed. "I'll do whatever needs to be done," Ozzy said. "Just tell me." The manager hesitated. "Well," he said slowly, "normally we'd require proof of funds before proceeding further." The salesman smirked. Ozzy raised an eyebrow. "Before proceeding with what?" "With discussing repayment," the manager replied. Ozzy took a breath. This was the moment many people would snap, or walk out, or pull rank. Ozzy did none of those. Instead, he asked a simple question. "Would you have said that if I looked different?" The room went silent. The manager blinked, caught off guard. "I don't understand." Ozzy gestured lightly toward his clothes. My appearance? The salesman shifted his weight. The manager cleared his throat. That's not what this is about. Ozzy nodded slowly. Then let's keep it about the watch. He pointed gently toward the counter. I damaged it. I'll take responsibility. The manager studied him again. Longer this time. There was something unsettling about Ozzy's calm. Not passive, not defensive. Just steady. Very well, the manager said. I'll need to prepare an incident report. He motioned to the salesman. Get the paperwork? The salesman looked surprised. Now, yes, the manager said firmly. As the salesman walked away, clearly irritated, whispers filled the store. Who is this guy? He's not even angry. He's handling this better than the staff. Ozzy stood alone at the counter, hands relaxed at his sides. Still no name, still no fame. Just a man being judged by how he looked, and choosing not to play the card that would end it instantly. Because Ozzy wasn't trying to prove who he was. He was letting them reveal who they were. And somewhere between the cracked glass, the quiet stares, and the unspoken tension, it became clear. This wasn't just about a broken watch anymore. It was about dignity, and the next moment would decide who truly understood its value. The paperwork took time. Too much time. Ozzy stood at the counter while the salesman filled out forms with exaggerated seriousness, sighing loudly, shaking his head as if the situation were a personal insult. The cracked Rolex remained in the center of the counter, resting on a velvet pad like evidence in a trial. The store had gone quiet. Customers pretended to browse, but no one was really looking at watches anymore. All eyes kept drifting back to Ozzy, the man who hadn't raised his voice, hadn't complained, and still hadn't tried to explain who he was. The manager returned with a clipboard. All right, he said, professional but distant. We need to document the damage and determine the next steps. Ozzy nodded. Take your time. The salesman looked up sharply, surprised by the response. Time? He scoffed. You realize this isn't a casual situation, right? Ozzy met his eyes calmly. I do. The salesman tapped his pen against the clipboard. Then you also realize, he said, lowering his voice, that this isn't something most people can just settle. There it was again. That quiet assumption. Ozzy glanced at the watch, then back at the salesman. I didn't say it was, he replied. I said I'd take responsibility. The manager cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the room. We'll need a method of payment, he said, before we proceed any further. The salesman didn't hide his smirk. Ozzy didn't reach for his wallet. He didn't pull out a phone. He didn't argue. He simply rested his hands on the counter and looked around the store at the cameras, the customers, the reflections in the glass. You've already decided what you think, Ozzy said quietly, so it probably doesn't matter what I say. The salesman frowned. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Ozzy continued, you judged me the moment I walked in. The room froze. The manager shifted uncomfortably. That's not fair, the salesman said quickly. Ozzy nodded. Exactly. For a moment no one spoke. Then the salesman broke the silence with a laugh that sounded more defensive than confident. Look, he said, I've been doing this a long time. I know when someone's serious. Ozzy tilted his head slightly. And what does serious look like to you? The salesman hesitated. Well, not like this, he said, gesturing vaguely at Ozzy. The words landed hard. A woman near the door whispered, Oh wow. Ozzy took a slow breath. Here's the thing, he said calmly. I didn't come here to impress anyone. He looked directly at the salesman now. I came here because I like watches. The salesman scoffed. Liking something doesn't mean you can afford it. The manager raised a hand. Let's keep this professional. Ozzy nodded again. Professional is all I'm asking for. He paused, then added softly, Respect shouldn't depend on price tags. That line changed the atmosphere. Even the salesman felt it. He straightened, trying to regain control. So, he said sharply, how exactly do you plan on paying for this? Ozzy didn't answer right away. He reached into his jacket slowly. The salesman stiffened. Security watched closely. Ozzy pulled his hand back out. Empty, not a wallet, not a card. The salesman almost smiled. I thought so, he said under his breath. Ozzy looked up. Who said I was ready yet? The smile faded. The manager blinked. Ready for what? Ozzy straightened his posture, not aggressively, not dramatically, just enough for the room to feel it. For the part where assumptions stop, he said. He glanced once more at the cracked Rolex, then back at the salesman. Bring me the invoice. The salesman laughed, loudly. You want an invoice, he said, for that? Ozzy nodded. Yes. The laughter died quickly, because for the first time since this began, Ozzy's calm didn't look passive anymore. It looked deliberate, controlled, like someone who knew exactly what was coming next. And suddenly, everyone in the store realized the same thing. This situation wasn't spiraling out of control. It was being led there, and the shock, the one no one saw coming, was only seconds away. The salesman stared at Ozzy, unsure whether to laugh again or push back. An invoice, he repeated, for a $3.2 million watch. Ozzy didn't blink. Yes. The manager stepped in, his tone cautious now. Sir, before we go any further, we need to be clear. This isn't symbolic. This is real money. Ozzy nodded once. I understand. There was something about the way he said it, not defensive, not rushed, that made the room feel different. The laughter, the whispers, the quiet judgment, all of it began to soften into uncertainty. The manager looked at the salesman. Print the invoice. The salesman hesitated. You're serious? Do it. The manager said. Reluctantly, the salesman walked to the computer. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as if his hands didn't quite believe what they were doing. Customers leaned closer, phones fully raised now. The printer whirred. A single sheet slid out. The salesman carried it back like it weighed more than the watch itself. He placed it on the counter, sliding it toward Ozzy. Ozzy glanced at the number. $3,200,000. He didn't react. No raised eyebrows, no sharp inhale. He simply reached into his jacket again, slowly, deliberately. This time, his hand came out holding a black card. The salesman froze. The manager's expression changed instantly. Ozzy placed the card gently on top of the invoice. Run it, he said. For a second, no one moved. Then the manager picked up the card. Right away, he said, suddenly very polite. The card disappeared behind the counter. The seconds stretched. 10, 20. The salesman shifted nervously. Security relaxed their stance. The store felt like it was holding its breath all over again, but this time for a different reason. Then the manager returned. He placed the receipt on the counter. Approved. The word sat there in bold letters. A gasp rippled through the store. The salesman stared at the paper, his face draining of color. Ozzy looked at him calmly. Order another one, Ozzy said. The salesman blinked. Another one? Yes, Ozzy replied. A replacement. The manager nodded quickly. Of course, immediately. Ozzy then glanced at the cracked Rolex still resting on the velvet pad. And that one, he added, keep it. The salesman looked up, confused. Keep it? For training? Ozzy said evenly, so this doesn't happen again. The words hit harder than any insult. The store was silent. The salesman swallowed. I didn't know, he said quietly. Ozzy picked up the receipt and folded it neatly. That was never the problem, he replied. He slid the chair back and stood. I broke the watch, Ozzy continued. I paid for it. He paused, but the way you treated me, that was a choice. The manager nodded, embarrassed. We apologize for the misunderstanding. Ozzy didn't argue. He simply walked toward the door. As he passed the glass displays, customers parted without a word. No applause, no cheers, just a heavy silence filled with understanding. Because everyone in that store had witnessed something rare. Not wealth, not power, but restraint, and the quiet shock of realizing how expensive assumptions can be. The boutique had returned to a quiet hum of activity, but the tension lingered like a shadow. Phones still captured the scene. Whispers circled through the customers who remained. Some were in awe. Others were in shock, but everyone had watched the same thing. A man who had been judged from the moment he walked in, and yet never reacted with anger, never flaunted status, never demanded recognition. Ozzy stood at the exit, pausing for a moment to glance back at the display cases. The cracked Rolex still rested where it had fallen, a silent reminder of assumptions made too quickly. He didn't touch it. He didn't smile. He simply nodded slightly, a gesture that seemed to acknowledge the unspoken lesson everyone had just witnessed. The manager approached him cautiously, clearing his throat. "Sir, I apologize on behalf of the store. That treatment was inappropriate, and the watch will make sure everything is handled professionally." Ozzy smiled faintly, calm and controlled. "I appreciate that. Just remember, respect shouldn't depend on appearances or price tags." The manager nodded, visibly humbled. Meanwhile, the salesman who had spent the last hour questioning Ozzy's worth stood frozen near the counter. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unsure whether to apologize or retreat into silence. His confidence, once unshakable, had evaporated. Customers began to murmur among themselves. Some quietly congratulated Ozzy, but he said nothing. He didn't need validation. The message had already been delivered, louder than any words could have been. Outside, the sunlight hit him as he walked away. Flashing cameras, curious onlookers and passers-by watched as a man who had been quietly underestimated walked calmly down the street. The story had already begun to spread. In whispers, in recordings, in astonished texts and social media posts. By the end of the day, the boutique's staff received messages, posts, and videos circulating online. Millions watched, millions shared. Headlines began forming almost immediately. Man breaks $3. 2 million Rolex. Teaches store a lesson without raising his voice. Ozzy pays $3. 2 million, but the real lesson is respect. Even though the store had technically profited from the sale, the real cost was the realization of assumptions. Every person who had witnessed the incident, customers, staff, security, understood that a calm, composed, dignified response could carry more weight than anger, status, or money. Ozzy, meanwhile, made a short public statement later that evening. Money can buy watches, respect should be free. Treat people with fairness first and everything else will follow. It was simple, clear, timeless. The broken Rolex had been replaced. The original piece had been documented, paid for, and stored. But what remained in the minds of everyone who witnessed the event wasn't the value of the watch. It was the lesson. That day, Ozzy didn't just pay for a watch. He reminded everyone that dignity is priceless, that calm composure and quiet confidence can turn judgment into understanding, and that true respect can't be bought. It must be earned through action, not assumed status. As cameras continued to roll and social media posts skyrocketed, one thing was clear. The world had seen more than a broken watch. They had seen a masterclass in restraint, integrity, and the quiet power of respect. Back and index pointing right if you believe respect matters more than appearances. Type respect in the comments and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Do you believe respect is more valuable than money? Share an example from your life.